This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to Roots and All. This week's guest is Nick Mesa, plant hunter, self-taught botanist, rare species expert and owner of Pan Global Plants, a nursery based in the Severn Valley, which, to quote the website, offers a selection of the finest, most desirable and often rarest plants capable of growing on these isles. And that's key. Nick hand selects plants, in the past directly from where they were growing in the wild, and brings them into cultivation. He's renowned for choosing sublime varieties and for openly sharing his knowledge and experience. I did intend to talk to Nick a bit about his plant hunting trips, but as a stop has been put to these recently, due to rules around the transportation of plant materials, the conversation went in other directions. But he starts by talking about how he got into travelling around, looking at plants in their native habitats.
I first got into it just through a desire to get out and see plants in the wild. You know, you can read about these things as a young, keen horticulturalist, and there comes a time where you really want to start seeing it for yourself, start putting things into context. So, I did a little bit of, looking at, botanizing in the wild a little bit on early holidays with my young family. So that's kind of a little taster. And then when I wanted to start heading further afield, I would go to places like, I'm trying to think now, the first place I went to, South Africa, I did on my own, and then started going to Mexico, but with others. Those sort of trips that take you really away and into some pretty amazing places with amazing plants, that starts getting really inspiring.
How did you learn botany? Was it something you taught yourself or was it something you studied?
Well, there's a question. I wouldn't ever describe myself as a botanist. I'm a sort of, I suppose, what you would call a sort of botanical horticulturalist. So with a keen interest in such things, but from a horticultural sort of background and basis. So, so how did I learn? I've learned what I've learned through reading, talking, research. I wouldn't call myself a taxonomist. It's like dabbling in things, isn't it? You can become quite good at some things just by having a keen interest. I would say that's how I've learned. I don't know if that's another one of your questions coming up, but learning plants, just purely on passionate interest. No one taught me all my plant knowledge. I think that would be the same for most plants people. I think it has to be, really.
Well, I think it probably does, because I think they've stopped a lot of the botany qualifications even, so probably yes. Yeah, I've heard things, but I don't know the detail. No. So when you set up your nursery, did you set it up so that you had an excuse to keep doing all these trips and bringing stuff back, or did you already have a nursery which you widened the remit of?
I'm trying to think. Yes, I did have a nursery. When I started going sort of plant hunting in earnest, I had a nursery already. But I'm trying to think back. It wasn't really about plant hunting in those days. Plant hunting to collect seed, although we did earlier on in those early days. It wasn't about collecting seed. I think it really was mainly, like I was hinting on just now, the desire to go and see plants in the wild and to really understand how they are, what they're interacting with, how they're interacting together, how they interact with the landscapes, etc., etc., etc. That can really inform how you use them, shall we say, in gardens. To a not just a visual way, but also a what's the word? On a more ecological sort of. Look at that thing there. It's coping with 6 months of drought in pure broken rock, wow. So that's clearly a very drought tolerant plant, for example. See what I mean? But also like the visual side of things, going to see amazing sort of hillsides of Arbutus Andrachny, or I don't know, something equally gorgeous, and you think, wow, God, why don't we plant 15 of those in a group somewhere, or surrounded by some, cork oaks, or sort of things you can do in the UK. We can do all sorts with our wonderful climate, and to see these beautiful plants that you normally see one of here and one of there, just about. And you think, why don't we plant loads of them? Why don't we do incredible, beautiful things with rare plants?
And why do you think we don't?
Lack of inspiration. This is exactly what I mean. I think if you go and do these things, you see them and you think, wow, let's do it. But I think a lot of people don't, and they don't get that inspiration. I mean, obviously some of it is fear of the unknown, and apparently that's a bit tender, but it isn't. A lot of people assume unusual plants are tender. That's something I hear a lot at the nursery. They say, well, what can I... Some local person might pop in that isn't particularly hell-bent on interesting plants, and they'll say, I've got a spot to put something. What should I put in there? I say, well, what about this amazing thing? And I say, it's particularly rare. And they say, oh, stop there. No, I don't want that. I'm not interested in difficult to grow plants. And I say, no. It's not difficult to grow because it's rare. It's rare because it's rare. There are multiple reasons why it might be rare, but, it's not about... They're not difficult to grow necessarily at all. So people do have this idea sometimes that, things they don't know might be tricky to grow. But it's often the case that rarities are incredibly easy. They're rare because they're, difficult to propagate. It's, they haven't been around, they've just been introduced, etc., etc., etc.
So are the majority of the plants that you sell in your nursery, are they hardy?
Yes.
Yeah.
The majority of the plants I sell in my nursery are hardy, definitely. That's another thing. People often, I notice customers, people come, they come in and their eyes are drawn to these exciting things, which might be on the slightly more tender side of my range, and which is expectable, really. I would probably do it myself. Oh, look at that exciting thing, and it happens to be one of the more tender things. So people do sometimes think, oh yes, his nursery is full of tender things, but it's not true at all. Most of my stock is hardy across most of the UK. But I do like to do a range because, of course, there are places like Cornwall, central London. There's all sorts of spots where there are all sorts of people, all sorts of gardens that can grow more tender things. So, and of course, people like to experiment as well. Microclimates within gardens in slightly, cooler places, a good microclimate, you can grow something that's slightly more tender. So with climate change as well, that gives us more opportunities to experiment. So I do a range.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned obviously some of these things are slightly more difficult or maybe more difficult to propagate. How do you propagate the majority of the things that you bring back from plant hunting trips? Is it by seed?
Well, I don't bring anything back anymore because it's all the whole problem area with regulations and whatever. But in the past, I have been collecting seed. Yes, clean dry seed has been, a pinch of seed here and there can go a long way.
So it can be tricky, I presume, to get these things to germinate if you've got no experience of that. So is a lot of that trial and error?
Oh, you mean no experience of that particular species?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say there's much. No, I would say you're mainly informed by your knowledge of that genus, for example. I mean, it's quite rare that you'll find something that you have to really rack your brains to work out. I mean, once you start once you've sown 1,000 different types of seed, you start to get to know the general gist of things. You know what I mean? And no, I wouldn't say it's too much of a brain strain, really. Once not for a professional nurseryman, really.
And obviously, you mentioned that you can't bring things back now. You've got your collection at the moment as it stands. Do you feel like you've got enough to be going on with, or are you kind of a little bit put out?
Always looking for more. Always looking for more. And but the thing is that in the UK, there's an incredible amount of material already here, and there's a lot of very obscure, wonderful, special things hiding away in specialist collections. As in, I'm not talking about botanical gardens necessarily. I'm talking about private plant nuts. There's an incredible wealth that we have here, and then again, there's also hybridization. Creating new plants through hybridization. So, I'm currently fiddling around with creating hardy begonias, as a few of us are out there, for example, plus other things, So there are ways around still keeping fascinating new plants coming to the public. There's also selections to be made on. You raise a bunch of things from seed from cultivation, and you start selecting very fine forms. That carries on as it always has done. So I do a bit of that as well, naming plants, and even hybrids, chance hybrids turn up. My new Mahonia that I launched last year was a chance hybrid from Garden Seed. Just happened to be two extremely rare Mahonias that produced a really, really good hybrid, and that's never been seen on Earth before. It's a gorgeous looking thing, and it came from UK seed. So there's all sorts of opportunities. My new one is wait for it. It's called Pan. Then there's a gap, and then Demic. So Pan as in Pan Global.
I saw that, yeah, on your website.
Yes. So, it's a bit of a Marmite name. Don't know if everybody likes it, but it had to be done. Yeah,
fair enough. Listening to you speak, obviously, I think it's fair to say you would like to see more of these rarities in gardens. And I think, if you're a professional gardener, you probably, like you said, you may want to plant these plants en masse. You may want to put them into a customer's garden. You can't get hold of them in any sort of quantities. If you do, they're very expensive. So does it fall to the home gardener to get these things more widely grown, or is it just never going to happen?
Well, firstly, I think it is going to happen. If people want it to happen, it can happen. And secondly, not necessarily expensive at all. So, if you're talking about buying some special, beautiful plants that aren't, the rarest of all, they're not expensive. Certainly not from my nursery. I mean, anyone who knows the price of plants and who goes to garden centres and sees how much they are for commonly grown things, and then you start going to specialist nurseries and thinking, oh, actually, they're not really very expensive at all. I mean, some specialist nurseries do put the price up, but I would say generally, plants are a bargain, quite frankly. I mean, you could say, oh, you would say that, but honestly, I do look at the market. What's being sold at what price. I'm not going to mention any names, but it doesn't take much research to realize how cheap a lot of specialist plants are. So I don't buy that argument. So I think your other point was availability. So it is, it's okay having things in numbers. If you wanted to plant a load of something, you would have to find the right amounts. But I don't know how many you're talking about, but I think there's enough out there often to satisfy the demand of. I do have some quality customers who are professionals who create gardens, So, they find enough to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was thinking when I said about the expense of it, I was thinking if it became very popular and you were saying it was difficult to propagate, then I'm guessing that would add to the cost of it.
Yes, it would. Of course it would. Yeah, but you're still not talking about much. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to think of the price of some really expensive things on the nursery. So say a lot of my trees are, say, £35, and that's a 2-litre tree. And if it's in a 5-litre, it might be £45, which, for a whip of something common, obviously it's going to be really cheap. If you're talking about a tree in a garden centre, that's going to be that price or more for something common. So if you're talking about a rare plant for 35 quid, a good tree in a 2-litre pot, that's not expensive in any way. So if I was going to sell a really rare tree, and I'm talking very, very rare, possibly never been available ever before, literally, I have things like that occasionally, and I might charge you £50 for that, or £60. But I still wouldn't call that expensive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't.
I think plants are cheap, really.
Oh, so they are undoubtedly cheap. We I think massively underpay for plants if you think about the work that should go into producing them, and I think we'll probably find in the future that we do end up paying a lot more or the correct price for plants. Which can be a good thing. Thinking about a plant that would make the grade for you. What makes a garden-worthy plant? What makes a really good plant, in your opinion, or does it differ on what you're using it for?
Wow, what a question! What makes a good plant for me? I mean, there are so many different plants, aren't there? Well, for me, let's try and distill this. For me, the things that excite me, they have both. Okay, let's take it from this angle. So if I was to walk into a garden, the most exciting gardens for me are where botanical interest and horticulture combine. So good horticulture and botanical interest combine. So or should I say design. So good design and fascinating plants. That to me is the high point. So you can have a wonderfully designed garden. So this is feeding my soul visually, etc. etc. It's gorgeous. But I know that plant. I know that plant. I know that plant. I've seen them a million times before. It only goes so far. So it's beautiful, but it only goes so far. If you go in there and it's beautiful, and if you have the inclination to want to know what all the plants are, not everyone does. That's fair enough. If you have that botanical side, that interest in plants, you want them really. Not always, but you want a lot of them at least to be interesting. Like, wow, I've never seen that before. Look at that! Oh my God, I've only seen that once in my life. Here it is, growing in a drift or whatever, or in an unusual position, or you know what I mean. So that to me is the. I've forgotten the original question now, but
what makes a good plant?
I think I'm still on the right lines, aren't I?
So you definitely are, yeah. I'm trying to now distill what you were saying. So it kind of almost is the novel that attracts you, but it sounded like what you were saying at the end there, that sometimes it's when it might be out of context as well.
Out of context? Well, I suppose so. I wasn't quite saying that, but I'm just trying to think. That could be relevant. Well, I mean, gardens are so out of context normally, aren't they?
They are, yeah.
It's quite a question. Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Things out of context. What does that mean? Like one monkey puzzle in a field. Yeah, that's out of context, isn't it?
Exactly that. Yeah.
But then 25 monkey puzzles at different heights in a field at different ages suddenly becomes not out of context. Well, far less so, shall we say. You know what I mean? Yes,
it's an interesting thought, I have to say. And also it made me think when you were talking about seeing plants in communities and trying to, plant in a sense, in a garden that mimics that, because that is what makes for you, that's kind of what makes it beautiful, is that it works ecologically and it sits obviously as it would in the natural habitat. Is there anything to stop us saying, okay, fine, well then let's go and plant a plant community that you might find in a UK woodland? Would that have the same attractiveness?
What? So you're saying like get a load of native plants and put them in a garden?
Mm.
Well, I mean, what is a garden? You know, I mean, so you've got a load of native plants, and you're putting them together in a way that nature would, shall we say, do in the wild if left to its own devices. You have to ask yourself, what makes it a garden?
Yes.
So
yeah.
so how would we? So you're saying get those elements, those plants, and then planting them in a pleasing way.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
it was. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
No, I mean, it just sparked it when you said about, you'll see something in the wild growing and it just, it works. And if we, instead of planting one rare shrub, we plant 15 and kind of make it look like it might in its natural habitat.
Yeah. So if I can just cut in there. So what I was saying there is it's not really about necessarily. My main point there was really about getting the most exciting things that I'm seeing. I'm saying I want that thing in my garden. Mm-hmm. And if just that example was about that, but also about, say, if I'm looking at the amazing, I think I was talking about Arbutus andrechny, wasn't I? So when you see that in the wild hanging out of a cliff in Greece or wherever, and the peeling bark and the beautiful, funky sort of form of the tree, the whole thing to me is just beautiful. A lot of people would agree they love the nicest arbutus. When you see that, you think, wow, what a tree. Why don't we see that more often? But so if I were to plant in my say if I had a large garden or a large garden to plant for someone, if I planted one, it would be great. If I planted 5 or 6 or 3 here, 1 here, 4 over there, whatever. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then you start building up that community of special things, of the finest things that make you excited. That was my point really, rather than try to go for the that was my point really. It was more the beauty side of it, but also the exciting side of it, which is the fact that you don't see it very often.
Oh, okay. So is anybody doing that well at the moment, in your opinion?
Do you mean designers?
Or public gardens, any, head gardeners anywhere?
Interesting question. Don't know. I'm put on the spot now. Who's doing that well? I can't think. I don't keep up with the design side of things as much as I could do. I've just got my head in the plants all the time. So I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. I'm sure there are some people doing a bit of that. Yeah, I can't think who though.
And have you got a garden as well, the nursery, or you've got your own garden? Do you kind of experiment with these things in a garden setting as well?
I do. Well, at work, I've got within the nursery is within an acre walled garden, old walled garden, mm-hmm. And so half of it is nursery, and the other half is garden. So I do mess around a bit at work, and at home I haven't been in that particular property long enough to have created the garden yet, but I've started. The main thing there has been to keep the deer out first before I plant in earnest. But I'm nearly there. But at work, yeah, I do mess around with things. And a good example of what I'm talking about is that it can be found on the nursery at the moment. I've got a raised bed area made of basically 60 tons of type 1 roadstone, which sounds horrific, but it's in a pleasantly curving shape. And on that, I dumped it there because I wanted sharp drainage, because my soil in down by the Severn here is quite rich, sort of alluvial loam. So I wanted sharp drainage so I could start growing some exciting things that I'd been finding on my travels. So there I planted, various things, but in there at the moment I've got some drifts of agaves, 2 different agaves that I found in Mexico back in the day. And they're so special. When you see them in the wild, they're just amazing, beautiful rosette forms. So agave ovatifolia would be one, and agave montana would be another. And I just thought, I have to grow these. And not just one poked in the corner that everyone says, wow, that's a special plant. I wanted to plant lots. So my montanas, I've got something like, I don't know, 5 or 6 planted out on the end of this bed. And they're now, some of them are approaching sort of possibly, I think they're about nearly 1.8 meters across. Are the biggest. And one's coming up to flower this year for the first time. And then the other one will be agave ovatifolia with huge rosettes again with these silvery blue. But again, I've got 1 here and I've got 3 over there. So when they fill out, they become really, really striking things. I mean, how many gardens in the UK can you see drifts of full size Mexican agaves? Not many. So it's a sort of wow factor that kind of thing excites me in gardens. So so I think
we need to be more brave and more bold with our plant choices.
Well, it would excite me if everyone did. I don't know if that's relevant.
Well, apart from, obviously, Mahonia pandemic, if you had to say to somebody, okay, right, here's maybe 2 or 3 plants, go ahead, try them, they're brilliant, you won't regret it, what would you recommend?
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry.
You put me on the spot.
Everybody hates this question.
I am useless at being put on the spot. So,
what would you choose today? Tomorrow you can have something different.
Oh no, what would I choose today? My mind goes blank when people ask me this. Customers always say this sort of thing. What would you? And I go, oh, I don't know. Go out and have a look. What would I grow? So, I told you I go blank. What? I've got too many plants. There must be something like 1,500 different types out there.
It must be hard.
I could just say certain things that everyone gets excited about nowadays, like Schefflers and things like that. But it seems too obvious and easy.
Well, I've got really horrible clay soil. What if I wanted a shrub that I could plant a few of, group about? It's wet, it's claggy. What would be really good?
Wet and claggy?
Yes. So.
Okay, so problem sites. Maybe a Rhamnus emeritinus, something I've seen in the wild in Georgia, Republic of Georgia. That's got huge. So it's related to our native Rhamnus, which can be good for wildlife, of course. But it has these huge leaves in comparison. So it's quite a striking foliage plant, really. So that's rarely seen. That would be a good one for those sort of conditions. But also maybe some of the more unusual willows, or even not so unusual but gorgeous willows. Things like Salix exigua, the coyote willow. That's beautiful, tiny little narrow silvery leaf. That's been around a long time, but isn't grown enough. It does sucker, so you've got to be careful of that. But it's so gorgeous that most of us forgive it. What else would be good in your claggy, wet soil? I'm just trying to think of certain things pop into my head, but they're too ordinary. I'm trying to think of rare things, aren't I? Special things.
Well, I mean, that's 2 good ones, to be honest. I'm impressed that you came up with anything unusual that would suit that. It's just the worst site, so.
Yes, well, no, there are lots of other things, but I'm just trying to think what they are. I don't do a huge amount of things for wet soils, but I'm just trying to think. I was just trying to think of something herbaceous to add to that there to spread the. But I'm just sorry, I'm going blank again.
Yeah, I did.
Failed.
I did throw a horrible one at you because most exotics would not like those conditions, would they?
Well, no, I have to go back again to my original point, which is I take it from by exotics you mean just sort of rare plants.
I suppose, yes,
a lot of my
plants,
plants aren't what you call sort of exotic. They're exotic to the UK, but they're not sort of, tropical-esque. There's a whole range of things. But no, I would say that, it's like the hardiness thing. The nursery is full of hardy plants as well as a few tender things or semi-tender things. And it's the same with growing conditions as well. Not just cold. I mean, there's all sorts of things for all sorts of positions. Whether they're rare or not. The rarity thing, I just had to push that again. The rarity thing has got nothing to do with growability. So, yeah, you can find very unusual things that grow perfectly in really, really difficult spots. I'm just useless at being put on the spot. Sorry.
That's fine. I will direct everybody to your website immediately because it's a good read as well.
The website's terribly out of date at the moment. I have to apologise, but I've got a new one coming very, very soon, hopefully, in the next month or two, hopefully.
Out of date the website may be, but you can still take a look through Nick's fantastic catalogue of plants and read about his plant hunting trips on the expeditions page. Thank you to Nick for taking us on a meander through the world of rare plants, and to Olivier, who is Les Jardins d'Olivier on Instagram, for pointing me in the direction of Pan Global Plants. Thank you for listening. I'm leaving you now with Dr. Ian Bedford, who has some information to impart which may be relevant if you're a fan of the unusual when it comes to plants, particularly those ones that sometimes live under glass.
As winter approaches, we'll probably begin finding that there's not so many demanding jobs to do in our gardens, and particularly on those cold drizzly days with claggy flower beds and sodden lawns, there's a little less enthusiasm to be outside. So maybe it's a good time to focus our attention on some of our plants that might have been overlooked a bit during the summer months. Our house plants. Giving them a good clean and a feed, as well as a thorough check-over for any pests that might have moved in to infest them. Especially those small sap-sucking pests, such as aphids, whitefly and scale insects, whose presence is often accompanied by black sooty moulds that grow on the sugars they excrete on and around the plants. But a common sap-sucking pest to check for on the more fleshy-leaved indoor plants will be mealybugs, of which there's a few species that occur in Britain. Although mealybug are rarely found on outdoor plants, as they've originated from the tropics and would be unlikely to survive a cold winter, they do very well all year round in our homes. And it'll be the pancake-shaped females that we'll find on our plants, being around 4 millimetres in length and clustered together in groups. Despite being pink in colour, they secrete wax from their bodies, which not only gives them a light grey mealy appearance, but makes their infestations on a plant look like blobs of fungus or cotton wool. The male mealybugs, though, are quite different from the females, resembling tiny dark-coloured flies that are very short-lived and not often seen. Where mealybug infestations have become established, the groups of mature females remain immobile, whilst they produce waxy egg sacs that each contain around 200 tiny eggs. The eggs soon hatch into nymphs that resemble miniature versions of the female, although they're very mobile and rapidly disperse to infest new plants, sometimes hitching a lift on our clothing to new locations, where, remarkably, within just 4 weeks they'll mature and begin breeding. Although chemical products and a few biological control agents are available for mealybug control, infestations can be controlled manually by us if they're found in the early stages. Simply remove as many of the mealybug clusters as possible using a cocktail stick, then spray thoroughly with a proprietary soap-based product which will remove their wax and wash them from the plant. Repeat applications may then be needed to remove newly hatched nymphs over the following 2 weeks.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.